All right, so we are going to talk about the history of public education. Obviously, you could see that there is a time frame here. We're going to break this up into 3 different lectures just to give you an idea of where public education started in the United States, the foundation for it, how it came about, the purpose, the reason, all of that good jazz, okay? You will see a lot of this on your final cumulative exam, so make sure you have a good working knowledge of the history of education. These are just fun facts that I like to go over. 1/5 of the population of the United States is a student at this moment. We have 7.2 million teachers, and that comes into play when we talked about the largest union in the world. The majority of our teachers are union members. So as you can imagine, 7.2 million people within various organizations who are organized makes a big difference. Typically, college graduates do earn more money than students who only have a high school diploma. That is somewhat important and was realized very early on. If we were in class together, we would probably do some agree, disagree. This is a great way if you have Promethean boards, clickers in your classroom to get your kids discussing, formatively assessing them to gauge whether they get it or not as they move through your teaching. Should the government play a role in education? What do you think? Give me some ideas. As you're sitting there thinking and watching this, should the government play a role in education, or should it be left up to local townspeople, or should it be a state thing? Should it be a federal government initiative? Thomas Jefferson is definitely considered one of our first presidents who was very much educationally minded. He wanted students to receive an education that was provided free of charge. However, there was a big caveat there, as you can see here, what he thought about education. He wanted our students to be educated in order to ensure our freedom from other countries. We had just gone through the American Revolution. We were separating ourselves from the British, and we wanted to make sure that that stayed that way. And he felt at the time that if our people did not have an education, we would fall victim to becoming either another controlled state or another power would come in and take us over. So he felt we needed to have something called universal education. However, that did not include minorities, and that did not include women. It was for white males for 3 years. They would have free public education, white males. Okay, for 3 years. He considered it to be raking a few geniuses from the rubbish. He wanted to bring up those students who may have never been given a chance to become great, Prior to this initiative, students who wanted to be educated went into Latin primer schools, which were pretty much private schools, okay, at the time, and they were very expensive. Only the aristocrats within the country were able to send their students to school and subsequently college. The reason for this is something you need to know. The purpose of education for Thomas Jefferson was to pursue democratic ideas and to serve the country. He didn't want to necessarily propagate old British ideas. He wanted to propagate and to influence them under democratic ideas, freedom, right? And he wanted to ensure that our students knew why we were doing what we were doing and why we were in the United States to begin with and what that meant for our freedom, and then to turn around and be able to serve our country in either politics or in the military, or be able to flourish our economy in some way by starting businesses. Okay, so to further democratic ideas, we wanted to know that we were a free country and that we voted for our leaders, and we were very different than having a king and queen as they did in England. Okay. He brought this to the Virginia Assembly 3 times, and each time it was rejected. And as you can imagine, the Virginia Assembly had better things to do on their agenda. We were just coming out of a war. We needed to build back up our military. We needed to expand our territories. We needed to create better infrastructure within towns and cities. And so to spend money for 3 years for public education for white males, it didn't make a lot of sense to the Virginia Assembly, and it was voted down. Within about 3 years of that, because we start to see common schools, which we'll get to in a second, pop up during this time. Other states and other townships started to get the idea that, hey, we do need to provide some semblance of education. We're going to skip over that. And this is where Horace Mann comes in. So he was the first first Secretary of Education for Massachusetts. As we go through the history of education PowerPoints, you'll note that Massachusetts is typically ahead of the game in more ways than one, and they typically outperform other states even now to this day in education. Horace Mann, as the first Secretary of Education, would travel to these different districts on horseback. And he started to realize that everything at every school he went to was different. They had different textbooks. They were teaching different things. The facilities were different. And he wanted to provide some semblance of standardization to schooling. This is the first time in our history where we see we need to be on a common ground, and thusly those schools were named common schools. Because if you went from one to the other, you wouldn't see these varying expectations, these varying facilities. You would start to see some commonality between all of those. Down here at the bottom, if you read that, you'll notice these were some of his observations when he went to these schools as he was visiting them on horseback to see that. If you think about it, how many of our Secretary of Educations have gone around to all of our different schools to see their conditions and before they pass judgment on what they should do? Not many. So this is a good standard of what our leaders in education should be doing. This is a great picture of a common school. You remember in one of my lectures we talked about that one-room schoolhouse where all the kids were educated? Well, look at all the kids, right? And here's this very mean-looking teacher there who is teaching everybody from the young to maybe the middle grade students. And this was during a time when, and if you look at the date down here, this was during the time when public education was optional and our students did not have to go to school if they did not want to. And you'll notice that there are a lot of students who are there because they did want an education. They understood what an education meant for them in their lives. Now, religion, this is always a fun question to discuss in class. It typically gets a little heated, but I'll let you read through these quickly, and I want you to give me an idea of what you think. So if you're sitting there thinking, okay, religion should play a part, should definitely not play a part, or could possibly play a part, depending on your answer of A, B, and C, it's always interesting for some people to realize that our country, not only was it founded on religious principles, but so were our schools. Our schools were very much Protestant in nature. If you remember why a lot of the Quakers and settlers started coming to the United States, it was to flee religious persecution in the United Kingdom. They wanted to get away from not only the Pope's mandates, but Catholicism and all of the mandates that were passed down that they were going to be excommunicated, and then once they were excommunicated, there were some big consequences in the community. And a lot of people wanted to practice their religion the way they wanted to practice, and so they moved and traveled over to the United States. So our schools were primarily taught in Protestant ways. And I'm going to show you a book in a moment that shows that, okay? However, not only were there Protestants here, but there were some Catholics. And so one of those, Bishop John Hughes, started to protest, saying, we're paying taxes, and you're taking our money to teach our kids, our Catholic kids, in Protestant schools with Protestant books. This isn't fair. It actually led to something called the Philadelphia Bible Riots in 1844, where it got so heated between the Protestants and the Catholics that they burned down a Catholic church, and people were killed, including children, because they cared so much not only about their religion, but how their kids were being educated. They wanted to say in their education, and they wanted to ensure that they were being educated the way that they saw fit. Out of this, we start to see the birth of parochial schools. I don't know if you've ever heard of what parochial schools are, but they're religious schools, parochial schools. So this is where we see Catholic schools start. We see Lutheran schools start, right? And we still have a huge number of parochial schools in the United States where people can choose to send their student to a religious school because they're not getting that in a public school. All right, we're going to skip over that question. Minorities. So Prior to the Civil War, 2/3 of African Americans lived in the South, and as soon as that Emancipation Proclamation happened, we see this huge influx of African Americans just streaming out from the South. Okay, they're going everywhere, and we start to realize, and they start to realize, hey, we want the same education that every other citizen is getting, and yet they weren't. They were not receiving the same education. Even in the North, it was definitely segregated and unequal. They didn't have the use of resources like white schools did, and they definitely weren't taught by the same type of intellectuals as other white schools. So you'll see one of the first laws ever abolishing segregation in education was passed where? In Massachusetts in 1855. 1855. Okay? And it said you cannot segregate students in any educational setting, right? It wasn't allowed, but was it ever followed? That's what happens in the United States. We pass a lot of laws, but then they're not really followed because there's no oversight. Happens all the time, correct? Now, almost 100 years later, we have one of the most influential, and you will hear about this and see about this and see this on your praxis licensure exam forever and ever. We have Brown versus Board of Education. Let me tell you a little bit about what happened here. So there was an African-American little girl who lived about a block away from a white school in Kansas City. And her father said, why can't she go to that school? And she was walking almost 3 miles to get to her African-American school. And so they fought it, and it was taken up to the Supreme Court level. And in this decision, you will need to know this for your final, Brown versus Board of Education of 1954 said that separate but equal was no longer legal. Brown versus Board of Education, 1954, separate but equal was no longer legal. You cannot separate students and say, well, they're receiving the same education, but they're separate. That wasn't going to fly anymore, and that was a Supreme Court decision in 1954, probably in many of your grandparents, parents' generations, okay, that this just happened. This was right at the beginning of that civil rights movement that happened in the United States, and it was one of the big catalysts for that. If you have ever heard of Thurgood Marshall, he was the lawyer who was representing the Brown family. So this was a monumental case and monumental step in the right direction for our African American communities, because for so long we had said, well, they're receiving the same education, they're receiving the same materials, resources, but they're just doing it in separate locations. It's okay. No longer was that right, because separate but equal was no longer legal after that case. Okay, did that mean that it happened though? Not necessarily, and we'll talk about that in, I think, History of Education Part 2 or 3, where we see the repercussions of this law and actually what happened after, okay? So you can see here where Reconstruction was, as Booker T. Washington described it, an entire race trying to go to school. African Americans during that time, I don't know if you've ever heard some of the stories, African Americans would, even when they were enslaved, would do anything they could to be educated. And it's somewhat even ironic now that we see our inner city populations, we're almost degressing to where we used to be, where we are not educating our students. I would even say Chattanooga is one of the most segregated cities in Tennessee. Memphis probably has the same thing. Nashville probably has the same thing. But we have all black schools in Chattanooga, don't we? We have all white schools in Chattanooga. We have very few diverse schools. And it happens typically for a reason and not for the right reasons. And we're getting back to where we used to be. And somebody needs to stand up and say, this is not okay. So, what do you guys think? Men are better educators or women? I'm sure we can duke it out. I'm sure there's some men that are listening right now saying, I'm better, right? And then some of you, one of my favorite teachers ever was a male teacher that I had in elementary school. So we can go back and forth on this, regardless of whatever your reasons are. But who were the first educators? Females or men? Who do you think? Many of you are saying females, and you would be wrong. Our first educators in the United States were men. Women weren't educated enough. They weren't even allowed at one point to be educated. Our men were the ones who taught our schools, and then we started getting ourselves into a number of different wars, and we couldn't supply enough male teachers. And so what happens? We figured out that women are, cheaper in a sense, Don't take that in the wrong way. But also, hey, they're good with children. They're naturally nurturers, right? They can be excellent teachers. So this woman, Catherine Beecher, related to Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, actually created the first, she called it a women's seminary, to train women to be teachers. And then she shipped them out to the West. She sent them over the Mississippi River, and she said, I want you to go out, and I want you to find a township wherever you want to live. And they lived with families in these townships, and it was the biggest selling point when people would travel through to find a place to live out west. Hey, we have a local teacher here. It was a huge selling point. So women moved independently all over the country and helped really, for the most part, expand our territories and bring new settlers to the area because they offered their kids an education. Now I want you to look at this picture and look at the date. Okay, this is almost 9 years ago. What has changed about our classrooms? And I know you're probably thinking, oh, look at their outfits. Yes, it's changed. Do we still have the blackboard at the front of the room? Do we still have our rows in desks? Do we still have a teacher at the front who's giving direction and, right? What has changed in over 100 years in our classrooms? Yeah, you can tell me, oh, we have a Promethean board now instead of a blackboard, right? Yeah, we have technology. We use one-to-one devices, or we use clickers, or we use cell phones with apps. Well, sure. But what has changed, and why hasn't it changed from 100 and almost 10 years ago? Why do our classrooms look exactly the same? Why haven't we evolved into something different? Ever wonder why? I kind of do. Look at the lifetime attendance here. In late 1700s, we were attending school just over about 3 months, okay? And then look at how fast that grew to 7 months. And you guys know that we go to school based on the agricultural schedule. So we still get summers off because even during the middle 1800s, we had to be picking in the fields. So we couldn't go to school during the summer months, could we? No. And we still are under the same schedule. Why is that? Why haven't we changed? It's almost like our educational system in the United States is like an old woman in a rascal. We refuse to even question the status quo, don't we? Okay? So as you can see down here, the U.S. is providing more schooling than any other country in the world. Look at our expenditures. Look how expensive education is now. It is almost, in the state of Tennessee, I'm a horrible writer with this mouse. We're almost at $14,000 per pupil, okay? Per pupil. Where is that money going? How many students would you have in your classroom? Probably about 30. If you're a secondary, middle grades person, you may see 150 kids a day. Where is that money going, folks? You ever thought how bureaucratic, how much red tape education is? Think of all the places where that money's going. It's because it's surely not going to you. Average teachers start off in Tennessee, what, about $34,000, $35,000? Which ain't much. So that's what? Just a little over 2.5 kids. Got to pay your principals and your nurses and your school psychs and your counselors and your receptionists and your bookkeepers and your teaching assistants and your parapros and your janitors and your cafeteria workers. And don't forget, you have not just one principal, but probably 2 or 3. And then you have your assistant teachers and your special ed teachers, right? And now we have reading specialists, and we have curriculum coaches and literacy coaches, and that whole behemoth that is called central office. People who sit in central office probably make 3 times what you do, but are they working with kids directly? No. They're lead teachers and superintendents of this and transportation this, and seriously. Education is so complex, and we made it that way because isn't education a business? Absolutely. Absolutely. You wonder why we take the ACT, SAT, any of those other standardized measures? Do you know how much money the testing companies make off of schools and off of you taking ACT, SAT, all those other tests? Billions of dollars. Billions of dollars. Education is a business just like anything else. And typically within some towns, it's the largest employer. It's the largest employer in a lot of cities. Okay? So keep that in mind when you're thinking about, okay, I'm teaching. I'm not making a lot of money. Where is all of this going? One of the biggest expenditures in most school systems is their transportation, their buses, because it's mandatory for students to go to school, so they have to be bused in. That means they're having to drive over everywhere, Timbuktu. You guys have not answered. This is another formative assessment. Formative assessment. This means I'm checking for your understanding as we go. Make sure you know what that means. Which person proposed the common school? Who do you think? Horace Mann, right? Thomas Jefferson, he proposed 3 years of schooling for all white males, right? Look at that. Except females. Good. Which statement is true below? This was Bishop John Hughes. Demanded tax money be available for all religions to create schools so they're not just Protestant, didn't he? What did Brown versus Board of Education decide? Separate but equal is no longer legal, right? Catherine Beecher is famous for all of the following except for which? She did not create the Teach for America program. So sorry. Most of these resources come from this website here, this pbs.org, if you want to look at some more pictures, read more biographies, or learn some other facts about the history of education. We're going to go through more on that site within the next two History of Education PowerPoints. Once again, if you have any questions, make sure you post those to the questions, comments, and concerns discussion board.